vibe as they evolve over a period of time. Um, the way this series took birth is essentially because both Preeti and myself, we are very passionate about the space of teachers training, teachers coaching, and evolution of the entire concept of being a teacher, right? She's done a lot of work at the primary and the middle school level, and also works as a parenting coach and a family therapist. I've done a lot of work in the integrated marketing space, and today I teach the same subject at college and higher education level. And then as as we do this, right, as we get into this space towards the second half of the mid of our careers, we realize that there is a lot of skills that we picked over a period of time, which maybe a traditional teacher might or might not have really worked on. And therefore, it's important that in this profession we keep upskilling ourselves. We remain lifelong learners because the effectiveness of our teachings in a classroom are only as good as the kind of investment that we've made in ourselves. In the past 3 days, we've spoken about a diverse range of topics from a teacher's own personal branding and their own vibe to how exactly do they shift gears between being a teacher to a coach to a counselor, how these terms are used replaceably, and from there coming to a place of their own capacity building in terms of energy management, both in terms of their physical, emotional, as well as mental faculties. And as we progress through the series, from just looking inwards, today our topic takes us a little beyond that, a little outwards. And today we're going to talk about diversity and inclusion in classrooms. As the world evolves, as the age of information comes in, as the borders start to shrink, the concept of inclusivity and diversity is not only something that's capturing the imagination of the professional world, but it is something that starts very early on at the school level. And this, as we were doing a pre-discussion and unpacking the subject, me and Preeti, we realized that diversity and inclusion is not only in terms of the physicality. Like a lot of my conversation was around the look and feel and conversation and the verbal presentation of diversity, be it in the physical, presentation of how a person is dressing up versus how a person talks, to the faith that he or she practices, and therefore some evident nuances from there. But the fact that it goes beyond and covers economic class that you're coming from, personal sexual presentation, not only in terms of the orientation towards the sex outside of your being, but also your own traits. How masculine or feminine are you, and to what degree is that acceptable? To learning capabilities or disabilities or specially abled students, there is a lot that falls in this topic, and therefore also it is laced with a degree of sensitivity, right? Not always are teachers, students, and even parents open to accepting and talking about it as freely and as openly. And therefore, anytime you're talking about this subject, you're walking on eggshells. But we'll try and keep this as neutral as possible and yet talk about these sensitive topics because this is presenting, this is important to be spoken about. And with that thought, I'll invite you, Preeti, to share your opening and initial thoughts on it. And then, as we unpack these subjects, happy to dive deep into different aspects of the theme
Thank
per
you.
se.
Thank you, Garima. Especially in today's world where more and more people are not really rooted in their birth towns and their hometowns, right? Almost a good population, at least in the metropolitan cities, if you look at it, it's a very good mix of people from across the country. And the more that is becoming a reality, every classroom is like a mixture of different cultures, different nuances, different faiths, different languages, different levels of understanding. and different views of life, right? And today, in a very politically charged world as well, it becomes very, very difficult for educators to navigate certain situations that come up in the classroom. Um, like you said, yes, it's important to also keep in mind that these are very real issues that teachers do face, very real issues that happen in the classrooms, but also something that most people avoid speaking for fear of being politically incorrect, right? So if we can keep that aside for today's talk, as you listen to us speak over here, with a little bit of openness and understanding that we're trying to have this conversation so that we can address it. It's definitely not coming from a space of judgment or putting anyone down or sidelining anybody. We probably may not talk about particular faiths or particular languages. We may talk about, particular faiths or languages or, sexual orientation and expressions. These are all examples that we're choosing and picking just to convey a certain point. This is not to highlight anybody or push away anybody, right?
Hmm.
And definitely no offense intended. So I want to put that disclaimer right at the start as well, right?
Right.
And now coming to the topic itself, I remember in one of the schools, I think it was around some political issue that had happened, some India Pakistan, something was going on, and there were children who were fighting in the class, and or rather they were playing. It was a playful banter that
Hmm.
quickly became political, right?
Yeah.
And children are not thinking politics, and children are not thinking war. And there was a child who apparently said, "Hey, you go back to Pakistan," right? And this we are talking about 8-year-olds, 6-year-olds, right?
Hmm.
Imagine what the child who heard this would have felt. And this child going and bringing this up with their parents.
Hmm.
What is that environment that gets created? Now, as an educator, as the principal of the school, or as the teacher, as the educator who has witnessed this or overheard this, how are you going to deal with this?
Hmm. Hmm.
Where are we going to, who are we going to advise over here? Do
Hmm.
we advise the parents to not speak about such things in front of the children?
Hmm.
Do we tell the children these are all parents' views, adult conversations, children should not have these conversations? Do we tell, who do we advise and what? Right? Everybody is entitled to an opinion. We cannot barge into people's home and say, don't talk about these things. It's not okay to have a certain opinion, so to say. Everybody's entitled to an opinion. Now, I'm
Hmm.
sure there can be people who say, no, how dare you speak like that? We've got to be liberal. Darling, yes, that's a view.
Hmm.
That's one perspective, right?
Hmm.
There are other perspectives. Just like we need to create space for your expression, we need to
Hmm.
create space for other expressions as well. Now,
Hmm.
how do we ensure that that does not creep into the classroom in a misplaced sense of enthusiasm that children bring up?
Yeah.
Another example that I can think of is a student who I'm sure would have been in borderline Asperger's or borderline ASD, something in those lines, right? But it is not fully picked up on
Hmm.
by the parents, by the educators, while the child is pretty good at particular subjects and cognitively they seem okay, but they have quirks, right? Where they're
Hmm.
not able to really do well in social interactions.
Hmm.
And this is a child that constantly gets bullied on, isolated, never gets to participate in, you know, very many activities that happens in the class. That eventually trickled down to academic performance as well,
Hmm.
right? Now, what is the mental health of this child? If I'm not wrong, this particular child must have been easily about 15, 16 years of age, but sitting
Hmm.
in 7th standard.
Hmm.
That's another
Hmm.
example, right?
Hmm.
If only somebody could identify. that, hey, this child needs a different kind of attention,
mm,
maybe a different kind of evaluation,
mm.
versus to just come from a space of measuring them with the same yardstick.
Same scale, yeah. Mm, mm.
That doesn't make any sense. This is why we need to talk about diversity. This is
Correct.
exactly why we need to talk about inclusion, understanding people from where they are coming from, understanding
Mm,
children from where they are coming from, what could be their challenges. It's not always defiance, it's not always, I don't know, an unwillingness or laziness. Can we wear the hat of compassion, empathy, to look at it as what is it that they could be going through? Why is it the way it is? What can we do to create a better situation? That
right.
would again actually bring up the conversation of collaboration and competition. I think that's another loop that we opened up in one of the previous talks. Yes, so I think these are some of the things that we will be unpacking today.
Great, great. Thank you so much for starting with that. And I think it's a very uh, important point that you've raised, Preeti. And it's very profound and heavy as well. Because these are, while they may seem as themes and issues which we keep brushing aside because maybe we do not have a solution, or maybe the intention of really doing much about it is not there, for the sheer fact that maybe we're not equipped to handle it, or there is so much that's happening in mainstream that these are just pushed to the sidelines. But these are very valid concerns and aspects which are very, very important for us to unpack. Um, Aspects which are relatively softer but as prevalent are, maybe a difference in the way a person just looks in a class. You and I, we were having a conversation about if you're coming from a particular faith and you wear certain symbols that are very pronounced, be it in your dressing, be it in, small efforts like you wear a tika or something like that, and that sets you a little apart. Now, the point is that that just automatically brings in some non-verbal biases in the way you've turned up, right? Uh, like you've already given a disclaimer, and I don't want to really, I would just go ahead with what I'm thinking and I'll just say it as it is. If in a class I see a girl wearing a scarf, coming from a particular faith, then I'll automatically think that this person might just be a little more docile than someone else, right? Little more conformist than someone else. Somebody who may not be as fiercely feminine or a feminist as someone else. Why? Because of the culture that one is brought up in, you start attaching the degree of freedom or sense of freedom to what you wear, how you appear, and how you put your thoughts across. So, what are the aspects of inclusion, then diversity and mutual respect, and the boundaries that we need to, keep in mind there? Or say, for example, sexuality. You would always find girls who would be more tomboyish, and there is at least a word which is not seen as derogatory or anything wrong with it. In fact, if anything, it's seen, you go ahead with a sense of pride, being more masculine than the others. What about the boys who are a little more feminine, in how they turn up? Um, their interest in art or music or the way they move around or talk or flexibility is greater than the other macho boys around them. The point is that, the line between looking at somebody as different from me, talking about it, and turning the whole situation into bullying is very fine. And it is also dependent on how you express as an individual and how the other person perceives and interprets as an individual. And then the role of authority that comes in. on, say, for example, the issue that you spoke about, India, Pakistan, and somebody saying something, etc. Now, I was just thinking that, oh my God, if something of this sort happens in your class, what would you really do to turn the situation around, or diffuse, or deflect, or do whatever? My point is that the other challenge that maybe a lot of teachers face is that the line to toe is so strict and straight on some of these issues or the curriculum, etc. You know, say for example, if I face a situation like this, what I would really love to do is, instead of brushing it under the carpet, turn it around into an assignment on history. Where is this thought coming from? What are your influences? Because I teach a lot of mass communication, I teach a lot of media studies, a lot of behavioral sciences. So it'll be a great project work that one may want to do. And as you start unpacking this, naturally you'll realize that yeah, a lot of this was just emotionally charged individuals talking to each other. But the question is, do I have the flexibility and room to experiment with teaching modalities like that, and on the spur of the moment be able to spin it into something that was a challenge versus an opportunity versus a learning environment. So these are also things that we may want to talk about, the flexibility. And last but not the least, before I hand it over back to you, is the economic class. There's a lot of work that at one point of time I was doing on new education policy, and there was some work that I was doing on with a libertarian think tank that was talking about the fact that instead of imposing the whole EWP inclusion in main metro classes, you would have seen this movie called Hindi Medium, which talks about reservation. So there's this movie that talks about reservation of the economically weaker sections in every urban, in every public school. So say for example, if there are 50 seats, 10 are reserved or less or 5, like whatever X number, for these economically weaker students. Now the point is that never do these students become a part of the larger environment. Why? Because they come from particular background, they have certain kind of accessories, their bags and their shoes and their uniform and their everything that they use looks a little different. Their capacity to be able to speak like you, walk like you, talk like you, have birthday parties like you is different. And increasingly, as the levels go up in senior classes, naturally they drop off. And as much as there may be reservations across schools, you do not see these students. And the urban crowd is biased enough to not want them to study with their students, saying they are bad apples and they're going to have influences. Now, in a heterogeneous and as diverse world as ours, you know, especially in India, how do we work with these nuances? Are questions that teachers are posed with. Also, are these my problems to solve as a teacher? Or are these a mix of administrative, education system, policy led, challenges that ultimately get all mixed up and are presented to me? So these are also thoughts that a teacher may encounter.
Absolutely. I think if you look at the landscape of education today, you have all
Hmm.
kinds of schools, right? You have government aided schools. You have your regular mainstream schools. You have these alternate schools. You have these elite international schools, public schools. There are a whole variety of schools, and I think as parents, many times the way we choose what school to put in our child depends upon the ideology the parent holds, right? If I
Hmm.
want my child to feel a certain way, right? I know a lot of parents in my rooms who literally short of selling a kidney, to put their child in a really elite class, an international school. And finally, when the child is there, they realize I could be in an international school wearing certain kind of, the same kind of uniform, but the kind of conversations that are happening among the students, right? One who
Hmm.
has visited Singapore and come, and one has gotten something input. But the kind of conversations that happen, and this child's exposure is not related. I'm not saying one is better or the other is
Yeah.
lesser or higher, but I'm saying it's different,
There's no
right?
common ground, basically.
There's no common ground. Exactly. That becomes the ground for bullying.
Hmm.
That becomes the ground for exclusion, bullying by exclusion, right?
Hmm.
As many parents don't realize this. I'm not saying we need to flock all children of the same economic class together, but these are questions that we do need to think. We do need to consider. Where many parents also have this assumption that the higher you pay, the better the school is.
Hmm.
The higher, the more international or classy or the more elite the school is, the better the service,
Hmm.
the better the education.
Hmm. Hmm.
I am not sure that is true.
Hmm.
I don't think I want to take one side over the other. But the point being, yes, economic section does make a difference. Now, if you are inviting children of different classes into your school, as
Hmm.
an educator, as an administrator, as a school authority, the onus lands on us to create a level playing field,
Correct.
right? When we say level playing field, we are thinking equality, but I'm thinking equity,
Hmm.
right? Level playing field doesn't mean we give all of them the same resources, all of them the same kind of approach to everything. When one child's exposure is not the same as another, one child can afford private tutors or big classes outside of the school itself. There are other students, I'm already paying an arm and a leg to send my child to school, uske upar I need to go find a tuition. That's unthinkable,
Correct.
right? So how do you bridge the gap for these students? It cannot be equality, it has got to be equity, meaning we offer support to children to the extent they need,
Hmm.
not
Hmm.
to the extent you can offer. As in, I
Correct.
can offer so much, but sabko samani dena hai, so I'm going to hold back something here and that does not work. Right? So
Hmm.
that is something that as school authorities we can consider. And the second is within a classroom when there are such biases that come up between children. The example that you gave is what triggered this conversation for me. The biases that come up in the context of religion, in the context of language, in the context of economic parity, in whatever way it comes up,
Hmm.
are there ways in which we can bring about a unification within the classroom, irrespective of whatever is happening outside the classroom? Can schools be an escape from all kinds of exclusion? Because outside in the world, you can't avoid it, right?
Hmm.
Of course, there is another
Or
argument
can
that
they?
that is the real world. They're experiencing the real world. But the thing is, that's the real world, no doubt.
Hmm.
But do you
Hmm.
like what the real world is showing you? Do
Hmm.
we
Hmm.
like what we see in the real world? If not, we need to help our children see that a different reality is possible. If they experience this here within the school, they'll be able to take
Hmm.
it outside the classroom.
Hmm. Hmm. And
Right?
also, yeah, I'll go a step further, and it's also not about like or dislike. Beyond that, it's about, is it serving you? Because in a school, you're in a place to learn, right? You're there for a purpose. You're there for your growth. You're there to learn. And if these basic denominators cannot be taken care of, then for sure the outcomes are going to get impacted. And to a certain degree and certain extent, I think that diversity is also important, right? Because that just gives you exposure to so much more. Like I was sharing with you, me as a student, especially in a metro city like Delhi, where there were restrictions on students being getting admission in certain periphery of the school. So there was a particular criteria that if you're in X many kilometers of the school, then the school is going to give you preference to. come in, whatever the logic of that criteria is. But the point is that just limited my world.
Correct.
Majority of my friends were from that neighborhood. Until I reached higher education, I did not know of the existence of certain kind of regional diversity. That was my worldview. Versus today, my kids, like my daughter goes to a school that has a completely international approach to it. And I understand that the world is also changing. But the point is, Preeti, in all of this, as a teacher, you know, getting the lens back to the focus of the teacher, it can be so challenging to move ahead with the times. And, because if you are in the position of authority, if you are the one who is at the center of everything that's happening around you, then how do you upskill yourself? And I think what we discussed yesterday has a lot of relevance to this today.
Absolutely.
Your physical, mental, emotional capacity to deal with all of
Yes,
this.
your mental emotional capacity as well as your understanding of mental emotional capacities. That
Hmm.
that makes a huge difference. Like I was
Correct.
saying, we've spoken about finances and faith and language and stuff like that. What about how a child is able to learning disabilities or mental intellectual abilities? We all have different varying degrees. Now there are certain children on the borderline, ASD, or children with Asperger's, children with various other disorders who, like I said, are probably not great with social cues, but are pretty good. In fact,
Hmm.
really good when it comes to specific subjects or topics of their choice. Cognitive function is very good, right?
Hmm.
They are capable of having a job and doing well in society,
Hmm.
provided society can also make space for some of their quirks. Right?
True.
We all, as individuals, any issue or not, we all have quirks. Right? The thing is, most schools, when we end up isolating, take children with disabilities, sorry,
Hmm.
differently abled children, right? When we have people and children with different abilities, differing abilities, who are put in separate places. You have a separate school for the
Hmm.
blind, you have a separate school for the deaf, you have a separate school for people with other sorts of disabilities. What are you essentially saying?
Hmm.
That itself, by fact of keeping them separate, we are creating a sense of otherness, right? That othering creates an innate assumption that these people don't exist in my world. For most
Hmm.
people, if we in one of the sessions, somebody did this beautiful visualization, right?
Hmm.
I want you to now imagine that you're sitting in a park bench,
Hmm.
and there is this really old couple that's holding hands and walking. And
Hmm.
you see a child playing, and the child slips and falls.
Hmm.
And a parent runs in to pick up the child. In this one scenario, what kind of a couple did you see? Was it a man and a woman, or a man and a man, or a woman and a
Hmm.
woman?
Hmm. Hmm.
When you say old age, how old are we thinking? Are we thinking 40s, 50s, 60s, 80s? When we are saying a child was playing, was the child absolutely able? Was there any kind of disability? Was the parent a mother or a father who jumped in? That we live in a society where we are heteronormative, so to say, right? We
Hmm.
assume that everybody is of this kind of an orientation, this kind of an expression. We don't even remotely. You can do this particular exercise in a classroom, or
Yeah.
on a stage with 100 people. There will hardly be anybody who will imagine a child with some kind of a disability, or a
Correct.
couple who has some kind of. Nobody will think of that.
mm,
Which means, in a certain sense, for those of us who don't have that exposure, we almost assume they don't exist in this world. Imagine the opportunities that get lost for them.
mm,
They don't know how to interact with others. We don't know how to interact with them. When,
mm,
I remember the very first time I came across a paraplegic, I was paralyzed. Like, I don't know how to talk to this person. Was he a very different kind of person? Do I talk normally? Should I bend down to talk to him? Should I be soft? Will he was just another person. He was a CA, right? Which I found out later. He became a good friend, all of that. But the point I'm trying to make is we're creating environments that are so curated, assuming
mm,
that our children will only deal with these kind of people, right?
mm,
Here I definitely have to mention my son's school, where he goes right now, Absorbent Mind. One of the things that blew my mind when I first met, the directress, was that this is an inclusive environment, meaning they
mm,
have children with dyslexia, children with ASD, children with various behavioral disorders, children with learning disorders, all in the same
mm,
place.
mm,
That gives an opportunity for children to be exposed that
mm,
there are
mm.
different kinds of people. How can we be
Mhm.
compassionate? Right?
Right, yeah.
There is absolutely no bullying. I was also lucky. This was one school that allowed me to sit in at that time. I spent a good amount of time trying to get my son acclimatized into the
Mm,
environment. He must have been 2.5. I remember this particular child, you could visibly see something is off. He's not like the rest of the children. You
mm,
can see that.
mm,
He walks in
mm,
carrying his bag. He's got these really thick glasses, and he walks in. And there was another child. I don't remember what he said, but he made a comment about the child.
mm,
Googly eyes or something like that. A teacher gently said, "We don't do that. He's just different.
mm,
You didn't choose your eyes, and neither did he.
mm, mm,
Can we include him in this game? Can we bring him into
mm,
this activity?"
mm,
There was no fuss, no punishments,
mm,
no long
mm,
lectures, nothing.
mm,
Just
mm,
eased into the environment. That interaction, Garima, I can't tell you how much it touched and inspired me. And even the way the school manages the entire variety of children, giving them the kind of
mm,
support they need. There are some children who struggle with a particular subject or activity or a skill. They make arrangements for the child to get extra support.
yeah.
Many times the parents don't know the child is receiving that kind of support. So if I ask my son, you know okay, who is a good student here, who's an okay student, he'll give me a confused look. What do you mean? We are all students.
Mm, mm,
That inclusion, that is inclusion, right? What would it take for us to bring this into all our classrooms?
mm. As I'm listening to you and
What
I'm also
can we do?
observing
Just
my
one more
own.
thing I would like to add.
Mm,
What
mm,
can we do to take away this thing from our heads as teachers, where we end up focusing unconsciously on children who do well because they're easier to interact with, because
mm,
they make us feel good, like we did a very good job. But our job as teachers is to pull people up, pull children who are struggling to come up. Right? I saw this particular documentary that was talking about schools in Finland, something, and one of the teachers said, no, we don't, we focus on children who have needs. There is
mm,
no specific attention that is given to the children who do well. No, we don't put them on a pedestal, we don't pull down anybody else, and we get children to help each other instead of getting them to compete with each other,
mm,
right?
mm,
Where one child can support another child. Oh, you're good at math? Fantastic. Can you support this person? Oh, you're good at social? Can you support that person? So between the students, they become each other's tutors. So there's
mm,
more of a collaborative environment
approach.
than a
Mhm.
competitive environment, which does nothing but pull down our self-esteem, right? What is your take on this? How do you deal with it in your classrooms?
What I'm realizing as you're talking about all of this, Preeti, is that this is so normal and it should be normal.
Yeah.
As you were talking, I was also observing my own reaction to it, right? My
Mm,
point is, why am I so awed? Why am I so wowed about an environment that is just being inclusive? Shouldn't this be the first basic of every school? As you were talking about, your experience of the particular school, you were talking about the experience of it just takes so little to explain at that young age, right? But the question is that in so many places that little is not being done, or it's not being done right, or it's just not the part of the culture. It's just not the part of the value system, not by design. Not that somebody made an effort to put it on the side, but nobody made the effort to make it mainstream, right? I look back at my childhood and my environment. I just didn't have examples, and therefore, if I become insensitive to these topics or numb to these topics, insensitivity is the other end of the spectrum. But the point is, number one, I have zero opinion on some of these aspects because I've not specifically, and when I say I am just addressing like an individual, right? Who is not, like you said, that somebody you met for the first time, you didn't know how to interact with this person, not knowing that this person is academically done so well or professionally is somebody who's self sufficient and stuff like that. The point, I think, of our discussion today is to let those examples be in my environment to begin with. We'll come to a place where we will figure out how to deal with it in the best possible manner. But the point is that even as teachers, as educators, as institutions and organizations, are we creating enough space to bring them in as number one? Why are these examples uh, still sitting outside of the system as exceptions? If only these conversations can start to make us think that we need to walk towards a place where all of this is the normal. All of this is the norm. The fact that what's changed, from where I was to where my daughter is today. She's again in a sanitized urban environment. I don't think she has any exposure of differently abled, specially abled, or this. Yes, maybe the other kind of diversities that we're talking about, there is still some exposure. But what you are talking about right now in terms of the specially abled nuances, those are completely other end of the spectrum. And there is so much more that needs to be done to first have those examples in my environment and then to come to a place to deal with them a certain way. And then to make sure that my peripheral, my second, third, fourth circle of influence, which is the neighbors, the parents, the grandparents, are also respecting those thoughts and opinions. Abhi to a lot of fight is happening on, what can a person wear or not wear, what opinions. And yeah, so my point is that these conversations are very layered, very deep. I'm glad that we are unpacking them as we are going along. And yes, increasingly with your as your desire and your awareness grows to want to work on these aspects in your own personality and in your environment, you'll realize that God just sends more examples of these. So it's also about, are you open and inviting of these experiences in your environment, or are you just wanting to just brush these themes away and put them under the carpet? Some of the questions are still open ended. How do you deal with them? Is it just a teacher's problem? Is it does it need systematic change? Is it a policy conversation? Is it an administrative conversation? Because everything is connected to everything. But I think at the end of these good 35, 40 minutes that we've discussed, just the fact that if I can make that small change in how I see the world is going to impact how my students see the world. And I think that much, if we are able to do as teachers, is good enough for us to take that first step. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Couldn't have put it more beautifully. You know, teachers being teacher leaders, thought leaders, who we are and how we show up is what children pick up from. And the more we are able to accept with compassion, see and understand with empathy the entire range of children, the entire range of the world, and the world's children, the more our children will follow through. And
Absolutely.
I know that this particular conversation could have probably opened up more questions than we managed to answer. And I think that's also the intention, to leave you thinking, as an audience, what is it that bothers you? What is it that you can do differently in your school, in your
Hmm.
classroom, instead of waiting for the system to change, the society to change, the world to change, the policy to change, the government to change? What is that one thing that you can bring in for yourself in your
Absolutely.
classrooms?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that diversity of view and, opening up so much and demystifying such a profound subject with such simplicity for today. I think for us, we just we just unpacked so much in this topic that in the following conversations, we are happy to, bring these themes back and do a deeper dive on all of those. But the fact remains that it's just about starting these conversations and bringing more and more divergent views on it. And as always, we're open to listening to you, inviting your comments on themes, subjects, topics that you feel that we can touch upon in the upcoming conversations. We're just getting started. This is day 4. We're going to see tomorrow in day 5 of 25 days, 25 skills. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.